Good evening, church. Tonight we're talking about rest and renewal. We'll jump right into it. Rest and renewal. Don't you wish you could rest sometimes like this baby up here? I mean, they go out for quite a while. I was just visiting some friends of mine when I was in Charlotte, and it was Keaton who was here last year for the Bible series, and we announced that he had the twins, and I haven't seen them, didn't get a visit with them. They're now 7 months old, and they rest very differently than they did when they were babies, because I remember that first month talking to him on the phone. I'm saying, oh man, it's a lot, these twins. It's so much. And so I was anxious to go visit with them and see what it was like now, 7 months on. And Boone decides to share with you how well he can set up, which is great, but also his communication is through shrieking, loud shrieking, and then he just grins real big. And I was like, man, am I going to sleep this week? I don't know what's going to happen here, but it's amazing. When they would go to sleep, Boone and Brooklyn, she's an amazing crawler herself, they pass out like that. I heard nothing. And I said, what did you do? What is your technique in this? He's like, well, and this is amazing, the details. He's like, we found out through reading some book that in the mother's womb, they hear this level of decibels of sound. And so we found a thing that said, here's a machine that will sort of replicate that level of white noise. And for sure, when they were put to bed, they would go to bed, they turned on the white noise machine, the babies out, rest. I was like, that is incredible. I think they also must have trained them for that, or maybe they put on their best show when I came to visit. I found out also that they called me Old Man Crothers. I don't know why Old Man Crothers, but whatever. Babies would rest. I think it's important for us to talk about rest as a Christian, not just as a way to go to sleep, as if that's the goal, although sometimes we look forward to that sort of thing. But rest sometimes as a tool so that we can complete the work that God gave us to do. Now, in the Bible, there's several ways rest has come up in conversation. You may think earliest showing of rest would be Genesis chapter 2. Verses 1 through 3, in which God created the heavens and the earth, and when he had completed his creation, the Bible says that he rested. It just simply means in there not that God needed to nap, or that God needed to sleep, or that God needed to recharge his batteries. He's God. He doesn't need those things. But it simply means that he had completed what he intended to do. There was also a rest that was to come with the promised land. When God had made promises to Abraham that he would give him this land, there was something that correlated with that in that land that they would have rest. In fact, in Exodus chapter 33, God told Moses, he says, depart and go up from here, you and the people whom you've brought out of the land of Egypt, to the land which I swore to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, saying to your descendants, I will give it. Listen to this in verse 14. He said, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. I will give you rest. In that use of rest in the Old Testament, there was a sense of the presence of God being with his people. And there was the promise of God that he would fulfill it and give them a name. They would be his people. He would also give them a covenant so that they would know how to respond to him. But he would give them a land, a place where his presence would be. And because of his presence and his promise and his name as their people, they would have rest from their enemies, from all the things that would beset people throughout the lands. They would have that in the promise if they would be faithful to him. You may recall, tied to that promise in the promised land and the covenant that they had and being his people, that they came with some complications. Numbers chapter 14 in particular, in which they sent in chapter 13 the 12 spies out to sort out what was going on in the promised land and make sure that they understood where they were going, this land that was flowing with milk and honey. And when they came back, 10 of the 12 said, we can't take it. It's too much. There are giants, they are mighty, there's fortified cities, we can't do it. And they forgot the thing that is so critical to rest. You may not be able to, but God can. God is capable. And when we remember that God is capable and that God can, we can rest in the truth of his might and his power and his promise. They forgot what God could do, and it caused an uneasiness in them, a tension. They were restless in their heart, except for Joshua and Caleb. who said, yes, we can. We absolutely can take this. Not because of our might, but because of our God. And with that kind of confidence, that kind of faith, that kind of belief, how could you not have rest knowing that God is with you? And when he gives you something to do, when he gives you a responsibility, a charge, when he makes a promise, it will be fulfilled. Not because of our might, but because of his strength, his authority, his power, his promise, and simply our faith to go and follow him. There's rest in that. There's certainly rest in that. The psalmist made a comment about it because in that moment, there was punishment that came. Sin hit the people. They failed to believe in God and they were rebelling against him. In fact, they were becoming quite violent, wanting to stone people in the midst of that. And there was a punishment that came because of that sin, that they would have to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. And a certain generation would not be allowed to go into the promised land. There was a lack of rest in their rebellion. And the psalmist in Psalm 95, he makes these statements that are pretty interesting based on that. And he starts off in a very excited way about the praise of God that comes, but then he's going to come back around to that rebellion. He says this, "Oh, come, let us sing to the Lord. Let us shout joyfully to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before his presence with thanksgiving. Let us shout joyfully to him with psalms. For the Lord is the great God and the great King above all gods. In his hand are the deep places of the earth. The heights of the hills are his also. The sea is his, for he made it, and his hands formed the dry land. Oh, come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker. For he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand." Do you hear the enthusiasm that is in David as he's praising God for who he is and what he is capable of doing and the promise he's made and his control over the universe? There's peace to be had in that, which is incredible for David to be saying. As you know, he was a man of war, but his confidence was always in God, and he could trust in him. He says this, "Today, if you will hear his voice," verse 8, "do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion, as in the day of trial in the wilderness. When your fathers tested me, they tried me, though they saw my work. For 40 years I was grieved with that generation and said, it is a people who go astray in their hearts, and they do not know my ways. So I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest." There was a spiritual imbalance that was occurring in the midst of this, and it was causing a tension, the disobedience, which led to the punishment. The writer of the book of Hebrews jumps all over this, and in Hebrews chapter 3 and 4, he's going to make reference to that rebellion and to this passage. And he's also going to talk about a future rest, a hope that we have. And largely he's talking about spiritual things for sure, but I want us to understand there is a correlation between our spiritual rest and our physical rest and how those functions. But first, let's deal with this. In Hebrews chapter 4, he's going to start quoting this. He says, "Therefore, since a promise remains for you today of entering his rest, let us fear lest any of you seem to have come short of it." Remember, Hebrews was written to people who were being tempted to turn their back on Christianity and go back to Judaism. But he said, let us fear what is written. Let's remember what's happened when you have a lack of faith, when there is this spiritual tension and you give up the peace that is found in God. Let us fear lest any of you seem to come short of the promises. For indeed the gospel was preached to us as well as to them. But the word which they heard did not profit them, not being mixed with faith in those who heard it. He's referencing back to those in the rebellion of Numbers chapter 13, which he just wrote about in Hebrews chapter 3. And then he quotes this. He says, "For we who have believed do enter that rest, as he has said, so I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest." He's quoting Psalm 95. He says, although the works were finished from the foundation of the world, for he has spoken in a certain place of the seventh day in this way, and God rested on the seventh day from all of his works. And again in this place, they shall not enter my rest. He's drawing a correlation between that tension and not putting your faith in God, and that primordial, that basic, that initial rest that God gave after the day of completion. a need for us to complete our works, our faith in God. And if we do that, if we're diligent in that, we will have a rest in God in a spiritual sense that is unlike any other thing in the world. There's people that worry every day about their purpose, but not the Christians. You know you have that rest in God. There's people that worry every day, am I doing what's right? Can I do enough? Do I know who I am? But Christians don't worry about that. They have that peace and that knowledge, that surety in God. There's people that worry about something that they've done. Do they still carry the burden of that? But not the Christians. Not the Christians. The Christians know that they have a God who's promised to wash away their sins. They know that there is a God who loves them dearly. And if they repent, if they turn away from that sinful life into God, there is a cleansing that takes place. Not because of their worth, not because of how great and glorious they are, but how great God is, and because of his promises, because of our identity in him, and because of who he says we can be in his Son. So when we see that rest, the completion of our work on this life, we know there's a rest that comes for us spiritually. But at the same time, there's a physical rest that we have to pay attention to. You've probably felt it. Where you labor hard, where you toil, and it's hard to function the way that you should. That's one kind of rest that you need to have to take care of yourself. It's a tool to complete the work. It's not the point. It's simply a tool so you can do a better job at your work. There's also a danger in those situations where if you don't take care of yourself, there's a lot of doubts and fears that can seep inside of you. And if you're not careful, they can lead you away. Have you ever had that moment where you've just gone through the work and it's only been about the work and you get into this grind, this nonstop grind, this weariness that comes from participating all the time, and then you lose a sense of your identity? You start forgetting the promises of God. You start letting that rest go. It's a dangerous time if you don't take care of your faith and cultivate that kind of rest. There's been many people who've fallen away because they didn't take the time to stop, refocus on God, make sure he's in the right place in their lives, and say, yeah, that's the kind of rest I need. There's people that didn't give that the attention they needed, and they've drifted away. Where's God in my life, they say? Why has church just become a grind? Those are moments in which you can completely freak out. You can slowly drift away. And those are also moments where you can reconnect and move to another level that you've never had before in your faith. Those are moments where you can take stock of what you have been and what you've been doing and how you curved away and say, let me learn from that. I'm not in a good place, but let me get back up. Let me realign with God and keep my focus on God and not let the purpose of my life be the distractions or the defeats or the doubts. Sometimes we find it too easy to put all of our attention on those things and put it where exactly it needs to be, which is on Jesus, on Jesus, on Jesus. When Jesus said in Matthew chapter 11, come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. That is a promise. That is a reality. When he says things to people, and sometimes we let this go, we forget it because it's become commonplace to us, and the weariness or the doubts or the lack of identity shakes us a little bit. We forget these things. Do you remember in John chapter 6, when the people were coming to him for bread? They only wanted the physical bread, but he's trying to remind them there is a correlation between the physical and the spiritual, but keep the spiritual where it needs to be. Take care of yourself, but it's the spiritual that's the focus. Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst. There is a direct connection between the comes to me and the believes in me. We must never let our faith get wrecked because we get caught up in the distractions, and we let it become a destruction of who we need to be. You are a Christian, or you're on the journey to become a Christian, or you're interested in being a Christian. Whatever that position is, you need to understand that your identity can be found wholly and completely in Jesus, and he is capable of giving you rest. There is a weariness that comes from doing good works, and that's a good thing to happen. Mark chapter 6, there's a situation where the disciples are so busy and caught up in what they've been doing that they haven't even taken time to eat. And Jesus commands them to come aside and rest. I love that Jesus has given them what they need. Yeah, they're hard workers, and yeah, they're going at it, but he gives them that tool to take care of the physical so that the spiritual can be maintained in their own lives and that they can be there for other people as well. If we wear ourselves down to the point that we're ineffective, we've not been good stewards of our bodies. We've not been good stewards of our faith, and we're not preparing for the work for our own lives and for those around us. Rest is critical. It is critical. Spiritually, to anticipate it in the future, and right now, to make sure we are best prepared and best capable of fulfilling the works that God has given us to do. Today, we're going to go into our discussion groups, and we're going to dive into this quite a bit deeper, and I'm excited about that, and I hope you are too. But tonight, you may be super weary, you may be beat down, and you may say, yeah, when you talk about feeling like you've lost your identity, you may identify with that. My brethren, let's do something about it. Don't leave this building carrying that burden and walking away if you have that kind of emptiness in your life. Your church family loves you and will help you and be there for you. You do not have to go it alone. That's one of the great reasons God gave us the church. We can be there for one another. If you have something pulling you away, something beating you down, something tearing at you, don't let that weariness become what dominates and defines your life. You can be a child of God and thrive in Jesus. If there's a way we can help you in that, come forward as we stand and as we sing.